who is Jeff French?
I think Jeff must have had like an 80 to 90% hit rate. We are probably more strict on fund size than most LPs. I think that's a fair statement. One thing LPs are bad at remembering is we are exceptionally diversified investors, right? For us to have anything even be 1%, even have a manager being a single percent of the overall pool of capital is very difficult to do. Being an LP, it's very easy to keep doing the same things. I wasn't the biggest believer in co-investments 10 years. And I thought there'd be negative selection bias. I was wrong.
I didn't want you to bury the lead there. Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. Superclusters fans, today we have probably one of the most well-traveled LPs around, Sean Warrington. Sean is the head of private investments at Gresham Partners, a multifamily office that manages around $9 billion of capital for 129 families. Yet, despite having a hand in some of the biggest names out there, a few of which I'm sure you'll know, they are still incredibly bullish on emerging managers, taking a rather off-the-beaten-path approach to understanding a new and often misunderstood asset class. Fun fact, the last point was the reason Sean and I connected in the first place, where he was calling me out on my family office generalizations. Sean, by the way, thank you for that. Prior to Gresham, Sean was the co-head of private markets at Alfred DuPont's Charitable Trust, where 15 years ago, he first broke into the fascinating world of investing in funds. Sean is a diehard Philly Eagles fan whose enthusiasm for them is potentially only eclipsed by one other guest we've had on this podcast so far. Maybe. Well, for those curious, I would highly recommend checking out Season 1, Episode 4. We talk about the idea of mentorship on this episode, in the allocator world being a crawl, walk, run set of stages, why the math behind fund size really matters to Gresham. Yes, we do give tactical examples. Also, why solo GPs just make sense. And of course, the small things to notice for in references, the language to watch out for, and a lot more. Sean, I'm so excited to have you. And I mentioned this in a pre-chat already. This all started because I wouldn't call it a disagreement per se, but it was something that I posted on Twitter, or X these days. And you accurately put out there, you can't generalize all family offices. I'm paraphrasing your words. And you said, we are a family office that still invests in emerging managers. And I'm like, okay, well, there's something there. So we got to have you on. So anyways, that's how it all started. But thanks for being on the show.
Yep. You caught my one X post every 3 or 4 months.
I'm glad. I am honored and glad that, sometimes luck is all about timing.
That's right.
A lot of our listeners will be familiar with this. I will not start from the tell me about yourself. The tell me about yourself will come across throughout this podcast in many different ways. And you've been on a couple other podcasts and you've done a couple other pieces of content as well. So I'd highly recommend people to start from there. That said, for somewhere to start per se for this episode, for those yet to be blessed, who is Jeff French?
Yeah, Jeff French. Jeff French is the gentleman who I credit for bringing me into the industry. Background wise, I was more in an operational finance role. And the dream was getting into an investing seat. And, better lucky than good, Jeff received my resume and was the one willing to take a shot on me when I'm, call it 28 years old down at the DuPont Trust. And, I think the other really fun fact about Jeff, I think hit rates in this business, if you're 60, 70% of the time picking good managers, I think you're pretty good at this industry. I think Jeff must have had like an 80 to 90% hit rate. The man was just a genius when he picked a manager, and he was a public investor, but his hit rate was incredible. So it was a really fun place to work for a couple of years for Jeff. So that is who Jeff French is.
Why do you think he had an 80% hit rate?
If you look at who Jeff was definitionally a partnership, just really good person. He was the type of person you met. He has a great smile. He really gets to know you. And I think throughout his career, he just built a ton of great relationships. And he really just leveraged those in both directions to where he was a great partner to them. They were a great partner to him. And I think it just created this really cool symbiotic relationship to where, look, for every 15 investments he probably made, I think there was quite a bit of overlap where he might have worked with the same person 2 or 3 times. Maybe it was an IR, maybe it was someone on the investing side. He just leveraged the lineage and the time he spent in his career, and it just led to more opportunities. I think Jeff is definitionally why this business is a people business.
And how do they evaluate you? I mean, this was like 15 years back. What were the KPIs to know that if you were good at publics or privates, like how would they know that you were performing well in your 2-year rotational program?
It's the right question. I give that team a lot of credit. I think what they were evaluating for was who has the potential to be a great long-term fit in this business. And they were really looking to build senior investors that they could have working at the trust for the next 20 years. So the KPIs were probably a little bit different than what most people expected. In reality, doing the Excel work, writing a memo, table stakes. If you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be in the seat in general. I think that what they were looking for was ability to look around the corner and, okay, you've done the analysis. What are the next 2 or 3 questions that we should be asking said person to figure out what the story here is? Can you, maybe not source a deal yet. I don't think that was ever an expectation for someone in the first several years of their career, but are you building a network? Are you demonstrating things that over time will contribute to the overall portfolio? I think they did an excellent job instilling that in me. We try to do that here at Gresham. I think that's really what the important thing is as a senior investor on the team. I mean, your people really are the tip of the spear. I mean, I think to Gresham today, I used to source what felt like all the deals. And honestly, at this point, I think my team's doing a better job than me a lot of times. But that's the business, right? I mean, if for us to be the best, for DuPont to be the best, you have to have good people. And I think what they were evaluating for was that ability to be a long-term, show some judgment, show some ability to meet people. I think that's the kind of KPIs that actually got you to the next level.
I'm curious, over the years you've been at DuPont, like one of the things you've attributed both Travis and David on the team is that they are mentor figures. They were mentor, and I guess are still mentor figures to you in this craft. How did the mentorship relationship evolve in your first 2 years at, DuPont versus your last 2 years at DuPont?
Let's just say I like to think of 3 periods of time, maybe just for simplicity. I like threes. I think the first third of my career, first third of period at DuPont, look, they were guiding you to where to go, and they were giving you enough breadcrumbs to where, again, you had an opportunity to do the work, but you weren't going to go so far astray where you were just wasting your time. And I think they were very good at creating opportunities for you to be successful. And those of us that put in the work, had some judgment, I think came out in a really good spot. I think the next third of my career, and again, this was probably still with Travis and some overlap of David as well. They were putting more, sort of giving me more opportunity to make decisions, but I viewed it as a period of time with training wheels on. To where, I was being in the position to lead deals, own relationships. But in reality, for the important meetings, I'd always want to make sure one of a David or a Travis would be in the session. And that was probably sort of the second third of my career at DuPont. And the final third, I think, like things always work out, the training wheels come off and they give you more room to run after yourself. It, by the way, gives them more opportunity to work on other team members who might have an opportunity to do some great things. I think that's sort of the natural progression I'm finding even in my own mentorship where I'm helping people out of my team. And it's sort of that concept of sort of first crawl, then sort of walk and then run, right? And I think that's sort of the natural cadence of this industry. You want to let people have early wins. Then you want to let them control more of the wins. And then eventually you have to sort of let them do their thing. Otherwise people get bored and go elsewhere.
I'm not saying there's a science to it, but were the thirds equally spaced out in the magnitude of years? Was it front loaded in the first, 2-3 years or so before you got into the third per se?
I think mine probably played out in something that felt like thirds, both in my brain, but also in a somewhat time duration basis. I actually think that's up to the individual. Because I think some people, the nuances, I think as an LP, that first, where you come in as a sort of an analyst associate, let's just say a junior person for simplicity, that part of the career, I think generally is going to take a few years, but you're looking for your big break. I think the next phase is the really interesting one. And that's the one where I'm not sure. It could take someone 2 years where they just come in and they just have this, sense of judgment and they have this sense of ability to work. But if you think about what an LP is trying to do, You have to find really good deals. And then you have to work the relationship with that GP in such a way to where you're getting the information that you need. You're doing it in a time frame that works for them. It works for you. You're also trying to sell them that you will be a good LP and someone they want to work with. And all in that same period of time, you have to have judgment and an ability to say either yes or no, and do it in a graceful way to where if you say no, that person doesn't hate you. But if you say yes, they really want to work with you. That, to me, that piece of the equation, I think is really up to the individual. I think it could take a year, it could take 5 years, it could never happen, right? I think that one I'd put, and then I think the final phase is more of just maturity. I think some people are going to hit a level of maturity faster. So I don't think they would be the same chunks, so to speak. I think it really is up to the individual.
Speaking of first big break in investments, I was talking with your teammate Irene, and given that we were already chatting, I was like, you know what? I have Sean on the podcast. What is the one question I should be asking him? And she said, I had to ask you about your first ever investment.
Yeah, sneaky, David. Yeah, she's right. That was a fun one. And I think that, look, if there was a moment where you sort of saw things working, or I saw things working for myself, I do think there was a bit of that in this 3-month phase. But I was lucky in that at DuPont, we wanted to be great venture investors. And I think the team at DuPont understood that being a great venture investor, the really good firms don't need your money. And that was sort of a cool experience seeing it firsthand, because we were investing in China and there was this unique opportunity to partner with a spin out manager who had been working at a fantastic firm. These were 3 younger gentlemen, very local. I think they were tougher to invest in for the classic US endowment foundation, large institutional investor type, because these were just 3, very local folks. But I think what was very apparent upon meeting these folks was they had the confidence, and what we like to call as quiet confidence at Gresham, is you could tell they understood the type of entrepreneurs they wanted to back. And you understood that they had the conviction to lead their shop. They actually left a ton of money, live carry dollars on the table. So they were betting on themselves right along with us, right? They could have just retired, right? Or they could have worked for 10 more years and probably retired. But they made a bet on themselves that there would be a big opportunity to invest. And this was called the 2015 timeframe. And I think as an LP, we weren't the only ones around the table. And this group over the course of 3 months got very, very hot. And the fundraise went from first, it's like closing in February, and then it's closing early January. And then I get a notice, hey, this thing's going to close early December. Where are you at? And this is where I give the team a lot of credit, because we had been building confidence, but the work wasn't done. We still had to get this approval. And I think the cool thing for us was we had a model, an investment committee that allowed us to, if we needed to move fast and pull things in, we could get a call going and do that. I think because I had worked with Travis, pulled him into the meetings, really socialized the deal over the prior month, people were ready. And I think the fact that things were coming in was giving the team confidence. Okay, we aren't going to be the only people around the table here. But what ended up happening was the deal closed very quickly, and better lucky than good, they ran into an excellent investment a couple years in that led that to be one of the better funds over the past decade. I think really across the world, frankly. And as an LP, having your first deal be 1, a food fight where you have to fight for allocation, and 2, this is the serendipity or luck of it. I mean, within 2 or 3 years, you knew it was a winner. And that doesn't happen often. I think we know this business usually takes 10 to 15 years to play out. This just happened to be a company that broke out. They owned a ton of it. It got public early. It was a pretty cool way to begin your career, so to speak.
So many fund managers say, hey, you know what? I'm closing in 3 months, or I'm closing in 2 months. Like I need you to make a decision in, 1 month or whatever it is. They force the timeline on you. Sometimes because they actually have interest and they have tons of LPs like, hey, you know what? Like, we'd love to give you money. And I've seen many deals in the past year close within 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And it has happened. In your mind, when you see those opportunities of, I wouldn't call them obvious fund managers, but they come from name brand institutions, or they have brands in and of themselves, what does that tell you? Are there deals you would rush into because of timelines, or do you always go like, hey, you know what? This is too fast for us. It's better for us to wait till fund 2, fund 3 kind of thing.
Maybe take those. I think there's 2 separate questions, and they're both good ones. I think first, one, like an LP should never, just because other people are doing a deal, FOMO is never a good investment strategy. I think we all know that. That being said, it isn't a coincidence necessarily that very smart LPs are circling a manager at the same time, right? So there could be a situation where it is a race that keeps getting faster and faster and faster, and you're making your decision without being a FOMO investor. I do think the two of those can be true. The way we look at it is, and like I hate throwing this word around because it gets used too often, but like we want to be first principle investors. And if we're going to be investing, if we think that this manager deserves the speed, we will always try our very best. So I think getting to your second question, I think a lot of LPs feel more comfortable investing in fund twos, fund threes, maybe even fund fours. I think at Gresham, we've taken the view that we really want to get people at the right fund size and the right alignment. And many times for us, that's going to come at fund one. There are risks. We're not naive to the fund one risk. There could be risk on team. We love solo GPs. It actually helps solve for the team risk somewhat, certainly in venture. But at the same time, people do tend to get tighter processes. Things are a little bit easier by fund two or fund three. Equally true, though, fund sizes tend to be bigger. Check sizes have to get larger. And we've taken the tack that getting in earlier on an investment return basis in the way we view risk is probably a better risk-adjusted return trying at fund one. But we're also accepting we're going to have some that we just bang our head against the wall and say, you know what, by golly, that wasn't the right fund one. But we use tight frameworks. And I think we trust that if we use our frameworks each and every time, even though occasionally that fund one risk might bite us, over the course of doing 10, 15, 20 of these over 5, 10 years, it will play in our favor and will make a better return overall.
Talk to me about, is there an example of a framework in which you can share where you use it to come to conviction or to make a decision about an emerging manager?
Yeah, I mean, we think really thoughtfully around fund size. I think we are probably more strict on fund size than most LPs. I think that's a fair statement. And really the way we've built our framework is less about the fund size and more about the checks people are writing that make up the fund. And in our view, there's different roles people can play on a cap table. So if we're looking at, call it a pre-seed investor who's looking to be collaborative, they're just trying to be a part of the cap table, and by the way, this view changes every time. So as I say it right now, it'll almost certainly be stale when people are hearing it. I'm not even sure it's true at this moment, but we believe that there is capacity for a very impactful operator type investor to write a $250,000 check. There wouldn't be an expectation of them being on the board. They probably offer some interesting advice, technical experience, connections to people, etc. So there is value, but they're not going to be the long-term board member. We think that check size exists on the cap table. The nuance is if that same person who is providing some value, but not really at the board level, be with the company for the next 10 years type situation, tells me they want to write $1 million, to me, that's a different role on the cap table. And what we do is equate the check size they're writing relative to the number of deals that they should write. And we honestly prefer to have less follow-on investment. And for us, then it becomes a math equation. And we can very easily say, well, if you write this size check and you're doing 20 to 30 odd deals, there's some fees that bring the number down, but that probably equates to this size fund. And that will be a filter for us. If someone's raising 50% more and we don't think they have the right to write the check that they're discussing, that's just an easy no. By the way, we'll be wrong. And the frameworks are not foolproof. What they're designed to do is help us focusing on places where we can get to an eventual yes and avoid the ones we don't want to have a slow no. A slow no is bad for everybody. I think that's what the frameworks help us do. We use them across all forms of investing. I think they get more strict in venture because that check size part is a little easier to understand.
And hypothetically, let's say there's a fund one, $15 million fund, 250K checks, operator GP. You're like, okay, this makes a sense. They're super collaborative. Everyone wants them on. They provide a lot of value for whatever reason. But that operator GP goes like, hey, the plan for fund one is a $15 million fund. Fund two, I'd love for that to be in the $30 to $40 million range. And I'm writing 500K checks or maybe up to $1 million checks. Does that impact your analysis at a fund one, or do you wait for that fund two opportunity before pulling the trigger and making a decision there?
Look, we view our investments as partnerships. You've met part of the team, David. We do not have personal brand bandwidth to have a high churn based model. So where if it's consistently a single investment into a fund and not participating in the next fund, that will create an issue for us on a team basis and time basis down the road. So in those situations, we like to have honest conversations up front. And what we would describe to that person in this sort of hypothetical situation is, hey, look, we think your Fund 1 model makes a lot of sense. You should think strongly about how Fund 2 is going to be put together. We would actually coach that person up, maybe 35 to 40 million. In reality, we might tell them, hey, if you really want to be a larger fund, prove to us that you can be a lead pre-seed writer, check writer. Yeah. And then let's try to get Fund 2 to where you're actually going to lead most of the time. And now you actually need to be a $50 million fund. So we may talk them into doing more. Okay. Now, what we would use is the Fund 1 data, the proof points that they can be a lead check writer in certain instances as a way to prepare for Fund 2. Yeah. But what we want someone to have is a strategy. I think one of the things that can be disappointing to us is we've observed at times where it feels like GPs have a view of how they want to increase their funds less by how the funds are composed and more about different numbers that they may want to be hitting just to talk, maybe it's just in conversations they want to have, they want to be $100 million fund one day, probably less thoughtful than we would like. And that's okay. We just try to have sort of a very boots on the ground conversation of what we think the market looks like. And look, again, we're not the right partner for everybody. So if they disagree, right, that's great. We'll stay friends. That's why we like to have honest conversations up front, because if we do it early, it ends up not being a problem later.
So in that previous example, as you're coaching, let's say a Fund 1 GP, and we might be going too far into this hypothetical example in general, but I think it helps for a lot of people to frame that how you help folks and how you advise folks in mind, which is, let's say they want to do that lead checks by, let's say it's like, hey, it makes sense for you to do a 50 mil fund by Fund 2, but you need to prove to us that you can lead pre-seed and seed checks. Given the $15 million fund constraint writing 250K checks, how does one prove that they can lead a pre-seed or seed round?
I mean, our advice, and like, again, we're going deep into this hypothetical.
Yeah, we're going deep. But that's the purpose of the podcast.
15 fair is probably too low to even do this. But our suggestion would probably be to this person, we want to see a few data points, and we think the market will reward you, as in the LP market, even the GP market, frankly. We think the market will reward you, hypothetical person, if you can put a few of these deals on the board, right? Find a great company, find a great team that is a competitive situation and win the deal because they want you to be a meaningful part of their cap table and you're going to play a meaningful part of their futures, frankly, and help us understand why this is a special company and really help the market understand that you could be this type of investor over time. We think it makes sense to do a handful of those. It could be 3, it could be 5, but it makes it easier for us then. And I think the market as Fund 2 hits the ground.
All right, we'll take a step back from all this because we've gone far in the hypothetical world here. I do want to fulfill a promise to the audience. I mentioned I would talk about solo GPs. One thing, if you could elucidate for kind of the audience here and put under a microscope, is what do you mean when you say that investing in solo GPs in many senses solves for team risk? Yeah,
look, one of our contentions, and I think this is more true in venture. Look, we believe venture is the hits business. It is a power law business, especially when we're playing in pre-seed. And the most, in our opinion, some of the best investments as we look back in history were never obvious at the moment the investments are made, right? I think that's sort of inherent to, you have to be, I might be not contrarian, but you have to have a variant perception than the rest of the market. Maybe you saw the team differently. You saw the space growing differently. That to us inherently is a single decision maker type thought process at the earliest stage, when it's less about metrics. It's more about how you evaluate the talent of the team. And for us, if we're evaluating a single decision maker, all of our diligence is going to be understand how this, she, or he thinks. And we'd rather them be pulling the trigger every time. We understand, look, again, there are some risks in that. But I think, if we're thinking about an LP where we are very diversified, I think one thing LPs are bad at remembering is we are exceptionally diversified investors, right? For us to have anything even be 1%, even have a manager being a single percent of the overall pool of capital is very difficult to do. Many times, we're talking about, frankly, basis points. And what we're looking for is those singular small investments to end up having the potential to be 10x, really transformational type outcomes for our clients. We believe at the pre-seed, the best way for us to do that is single decision making. yes, there is, some risks that you have to think about, and heaven forbid type risks that do exist. But there are LPAs designed to help. At the end of the day, these are not sort of private equity investments where you own the business, and you would have to legitimately, as an LP, roll up your sleeves and put in new management. I think there are structures in place to solve for the worst case scenarios. And honestly, venture is not about playing for the worst case. You're playing for like the singular upside cases. So let's focus our diligence where it matters. And removing team risk to us, probably, at least we believe, it increases the overall return potential.
When you do, I'm not sure if this has been in your portfolio already. If not, we can speak in hypotheticals again. But when you invest in a partnership and one of the partners leaves or for whatever reason is no longer involved, do you re-underwrite that fund, or do you just go like, hey, we've already committed, keep going with it? We may need to do it all over again when you do the next fund. How does that conversation happen?
I think look, every situation's different. I think there always is some level of re-underwriting. So the upside, the positive case scenario would be you invested in a 2-3 person team, and the one that you had the most conviction in, the one that you have the best relationship in, is the one sticking around. I still think there's a mental re-underwriting. I mean, LPs, like, we underwrite every fund, every re-up. There's easy re-ups. There's ones where, a lot of things are telling you should do this. There's also hard re-ups. But I think a lot of times, look, like, that's what I think the big risk that LPs don't appreciate. There's this view that these 2 and 3 person teams coming together creates sort of this better judgment. What they're not factoring in is that these are somewhat forced marriages, right? These are people who may or may not have long histories together. They may not have great bedside manner when they're actually in the thick of it. And I think we've noticed over the last couple of years, there have been examples of these partnerships that haven't worked out. And I think any of us have gone through difficult periods of time. Like, that is not going to be, I think what we're looking for is people to be in a mindset where it's conducive to them being their best version of themselves. And I think if they're spending a year or two trying to undo a partnership, inherently, that's not the best version of themselves. So yes, we would certainly think about it, but it's, there's some level of re-underwriting. You want to support people, but we are, in our case, working for clients, and we need to do well by them as well.
So to touch on alignment, which is something you mentioned earlier as well, how do you think about alignment? How do you define alignment?
Yeah, that's, look, alignment can mean a lot of different things. I think some people use very black and white dollars and cents, but in venture, we know that the GP commits most of the time are pretty small. I think, on an LPA basis, the lawyers have won, they're always very low. There are certain GPs who scale them up. So of course, there are a few that really size in large. Because of that dynamic where the dollars at work may not be the key driver of alignment, we're actually trying to understand someone's passion. Like, why are they raising this fund? Like, is their goal to be going to parties and having a job and just sort of staying in the mix, which could work, but like may not be the best thing for everyone? Or do they really love investing? Like, is it their passion to work with entrepreneurs? Is it their passion to find the next great idea and really help young developing teams get to the next level? We're looking for people who are in it for reasons that we believe will drive great returns. And again, like, their goals actually might not, they may be getting to that same place we want to get to for different reasons. They just may want to work with amazingly talented people. That's great alignment, right? Because that's what we're trying to do as well. We're just thinking of it from a monetarily gain. So I think that's sort of, we try to be open-minded of finding real alignment. I think that's one thing as an LP we have to be mindful of. Like, people get burned out too, right? You could be very passionate and connected with something at the beginning and middle of your career, but at some point you plateau and get less engaged. I think the hard part of our jobs as LPs is understanding alignment at the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's never obvious, is maybe the point I'm trying to come across. And sometimes you make what is an easy re-up. It could be your 8th time investing with someone, but what if they lost their passion 2 funds ago? What if the economics aren't translated to the right people around the table to where, that's the kind of things we're trying to understand. Is the alignment right now in reality today and over the next, call it 5 to 10 years, where we need it to be? It's never a black and white answer, is the short answer.
And so when it comes to alignment and underwriting alignment and motivation, at least in my experience, at least first conversation, maybe second conversation I have with the manager, they go like, I'm in it for the long run. I'm here for like 2-3 decades. They will always say that. There's like, and it's like scripted almost.
Yeah.
How do you do the diligence on the references or potentially just ask the right questions on alignment?
Yeah, I mean, like, wow, we don't think no one knows if they're in it for 2 to 3 decades.
Right.
I think we can talk to the founders. I do think that comes out in the conversations of like, we ask all the founder references, like, why do you invite this person in your cap table? We think of it as an invitation. And we're looking for the words they use to explain, like, what is this person's excitement? Like, did they hop on a plane and get there immediately? Were they on the phone during their vacation trying to solve a problem? Are they the one offering tough advice when everyone else is cheerleading to raise a huge round? Are they the one talking about the difficult things? Look, there's always lots of little data points. Like, this is a CFA quote, but like, it's never one single thing, right? It's like a mosaic of a lot of various things that come together. And like Irene and I talk about this on my team a lot. I think in our best deals, the references they're never boring is the wrong word, but they become consistent and repetitive. And you hit like the 8th reference, and you're like, you sort of know what you're going to hear at this point. That's when we start to feel great, because now we know that we're onto something. We have a sense of who this person is. You're always looking for that, that little thread you can pull that takes you in a different way. But in reality, our best deals, we tend to have a pretty good sense after 5 or 6 references.
Are there archetypes of references you make sure you cover? Do you make sure you always talk to, for example, you mentioned founders. Do you always make sure you talk to a co-investor? Do you always make sure you talk to an ex-colleague? Like, are there archetypes of references that you make sure you cover?
They are. I think one of the cores for us, though, is we want to make sure to have at least several references where we feel like our relationship with the reference is valuable to that person, to where they're going to be honest. I think as an LP, one should be skeptical. And when you get a list of references, inherently those references are presumably positive. And if they're not, like, why are we even here in the first place? Right. So what we're trying to do is find an off-list reference to where we have a personal connection to that person, where we're going to get honest feedback. Or even it's maybe not honest isn't the right way. I think understanding context is really important. And, words mean different things to different people. And if you know how someone speaks, you can take the subtext of the words they use and understand, like, their energy levels, for example. Like, is someone are they passive speakers, or actors? Like, that helps. So I think we always have to get to at least 2, 3 personal references where we can understand what the sub meaning is. Yeah. And then look, we're always going to do a handful of founder references. They're actually founders are the aperture is wider. I think, VCs and co-investors sort of understand what the references are supposed to say. Founders have a wider aperture, which always makes them valuable. But again, I think the core that we want is someone that we can trust. The good thing with venture is we can always find it. Other parts of our portfolio, like private equity, like the cool thing of venture is everything's interconnected. It's all on PitchBook. It's all, somewhat.
Is it all on PitchBook?
It's not all on PitchBook, but you can find connections, right? Like the deals they're broadly shared. Private equity, like you can have 2 people in Chicago, where I am right now, who are both great private equity managers who have no idea who each other are, right? They've never heard of each other's deals. They aren't in the same circles. So it's tougher to find it's tough to find nodes of connection across other asset classes. Venture, if we can't find a node of connection, like that's a bad sign out of the gate.
And I this is probably not the best proxy or heuristic, but when you come across a manager, and I assume one of the first things you look at is their LinkedIn profile. Who are you co-connected with? Who's the first, like, mutual connection? Does it ever worry you if a manager has less than, I'm not going to give a number, but like an X number of connections on LinkedIn? Like sometimes I come into these conversations, I talk with a manager, and they have 700 connections on LinkedIn. I'm like, well, I feel like if you want to build a network, like you need more than 700. Do you ever have those moments of reticence?
I think if I wouldn't use LinkedIn or one specific service, like LinkedIn it's fine. Like I don't, I think it's fine. I think, look, it's very valuable for doing exactly what you just said. Like, let's see what easy connections I might have. What I think we've done a maybe different job of is if someone lives in San Francisco, I think there's 5 people we could reach out to. And if none of them have interacted with this person, that's a bad sign. Like we have network nodes in New York, San Francisco. Those are probably for venture, the 2 biggest nodes that we have, a little bit in LA. But then you can go deeper, right? If it's fintech, if it's enterprise SaaS. So what we're looking for are, we'll reach out to those people and, hey, have you ran into this person? Do you know someone who knows them? Maybe you can also triangulate to where, this person invested in company X and we have a friend, Y who did the same deal. At least they could get us connected to the founder of the company in such a way to where we have a better connection. So I think LinkedIn's a really great tool, but we don't view it as gospel, might be the way to think about it.
To switch gears a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe your team is 4 people. That's a small team to be doing, smaller than like just emerging manager, like checks, like sub $50 million checks. How do you split the work amongst you 4?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate, and I have a team of 3 exceptionally hardworking folks. So look, all credit goes to that group. I think without those people, this model doesn't work. I go back to that word frameworks. We have to be really thoughtful about where we spend our time. And I think one thing GPs learn about us is, let's say we get to a phone call, which, by the way, there's a framework of whether we'll take the phone call very quickly, like within 2 or 3 days. Usually we know within minutes, but in 2 or 3 days, we're going to get back to that group and let them know, like, hey, is there a path to this being a yes? And if the answer is no, like we don't see a path to getting to us, the answer is just no. Like, we're not going to hang around the hoop. We're not going to do more work to see either there's something really exciting that we want to learn more about, and that might be the way we get to a yes, or the answer is just no. And what that ultimately leads to is a lot of really quick no's and a lot of really tight filters. I think at first that can bother people, but I think they come to appreciate it because we're not wasting anyone's time. So I think that framework that we talked about earlier is really how we save our time for things that really matter. It doesn't help the bandwidth side. We cover multiple asset classes, and I personally believe there's a bit of a palate cleansing effect to where you go from venture to evaluating real estate or energy. And it actually, by taking your head up and doing something else for a stretch, for a 2 or 3 week sprint for 2 months, I actually think you come back to venture with a better mindset and sort of a reorientation of what great can look like. What we don't want to do is sort of build up this view of what great is and then like keep knocking that down. Because what if we're wrong? Like, that's the hard part of being an LP, is like we deal in grays all the time. There's never like a definitively right yes or definitively, right no. Your best guess is you do good work and you do good references and you have clear heads when you make the decision of yes or no. I think actually going up and doing something else for a little while helps us come back and stay grounded. So I think there's a bit of a cheat code in that bandwidth where, yes, we run hard, we run fast, but I think the palate cleansing is valuable.
I love the terminology, palate cleansing. I think it's the first time I've heard of that terminology, at least in respect to using it in this context. I'm a big believer in it because, frankly, I feel like some of the best lessons we can learn about venture are from people outside of venture, and that could be our private equity, real estate counterparts. I also spend a lot of time with folks in Hollywood and the culinary world and all that, and I just, that step back and just like, how do I evaluate teams, businesses as a whole? There's a lot of cross parallels that are very useful across industries.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I think we like. I think understanding what greatness could look like, that transcends asset class. And, we have really special people across our portfolio. And I completely agree. Knowing what works in over here can make such a big difference when you change over and do a different asset class.
I 100%, 200% agree. I do want to call out something, and I didn't want you to bury the lead there. You mentioned you have a framework for phone calls. If you take the phone call, I have to ask, what is it?
Well, the frameworks, in context of, we want to ask ourselves, like our venture portfolio, we've gotten, again, I mentioned being strict on fund size earlier when we started the call. We really have taken that to the core. We, of course, have our multi-stage funds. We have 2 excellent ones, one that invests super early, one that invests super concentrated. We believe that gives us great multi-stage exposure. From there, we're looking for funds that are below $150 million. So one of the very short frameworks is if the fund is over 150, the fund is not for us. And what we mean by that is we're going to have funds, and to be clear, like funds will matriculate over 150 and we think they're excellent investors. Again, partnership is the goal. So we will have funds that are between 200, 400, 500, but we want them to grow as a fund 2, a fund 3, a fund 4 for us. Yeah. And that really quick framework, by the way, it's sometimes, you'll have LP friends who are really excited about a manager raising 250, and you can want to do the call. But actually having the framework where, hey, that's not a fit for us. It actually is a way to release that sort of, wanting to meet that group and say, oh no, it's not for us. The funny thing is, like, we trade notes with tons of LPs. It actually makes it easier to converse with other LPs because then they understand what we like. We're not really crossing tentacles and things that don't work. And if it's a $300 million, new startup venture fund, we're not going to have a view, and they know that. But if they're looking at $100 million fund, I can tell you most LPs will, have a sense that they should probably give us a call and like, have we taken a look? So that's really what I meant by a framework. The only other piece on the call, I think for venture, we're looking for one or two things. We're like, this person is uniquely special for this reason. And if we can't find one or two things that make this person stand out in a very special way, life's a little too short for us. People hate that answer, but look, it could be a great deal, but it will be a great deal for somebody else.
For better, for worse, there is an LP for every GP strategy out there.
Exactly. I mean, again, it's a very subjective industry, right? Like what someone did over the past 10 years, like we all know, like past performance does not suggest future performance. And like, unfortunately, that is a true statement. Like we've all seen that. So yeah, exactly. Like we aren't right fit for everybody, and that's okay.
I love it. Before we land the plane here, I'd love to ask you a couple questions that just take ourselves outside of the venture world and LP talk for a while. As you know, I was chatting with your teammate, Irene, who I absolutely adore, and she's brilliant. And she told me about your obsession with travel. And if you'll humor me, and it's also something I realized when I was looking at your social media across different kind of websites, but if you'll humor me, as someone who's gotten his frequent flyer miles to boast and having sampled Mao Tai flavored latte and stayed at the opposite house in China and spearfishing and lobstering.
It closed, unfortunately. That hotel closed. I love that hotel, though.
Really? Did it close?
Mm-hmm. Such a cool place, but it did not survive COVID, unfortunately.
That makes me sad because after seeing your commentary on it, I'm like, I've got to check it out. Unfortunately, I guess I can't now. But the question to you is, how many days did you travel in 2024? Oh gosh,
I have not calculated 2024 yet. That number scares me. I can tell you in 2023, okay. It was about 165 days, nights, I should say, being gone. There was a bit of personal travel in there, but look, this is a business to where, we think the people side of this business is mission critical. Yeah. And like our goal, like our check size is again, we're small fund investors. So our check size is meaningful to the people we invest in. If they're going to give us the right to be a large percentage of their fund, I think the way we build that trust is in person. So our goal is to go spend quality time with people that usually, we want to get a meal with someone essentially every year if possible. We think that makes a really big difference. So the way to do that is show up and give people a chance to be available.
And this might be semantics, to be completely honest, but you say meal, does that discount coffee meetings or?
Yeah, I think coffee would get to, because I know, I don't know about you, but the coffee meeting tends to have that quick, you really can't have that long, nice discussion. Back to this conversation, David, we're trying to get a little deeper, a little more about knowing each other. I think that comes out better in a meal context, certainly over lunch, more over a dinner, obviously. For coffee, you're consuming caffeine, presumably inherently a little bit quicker. Probably not the most. I think still, look, an in-person coffee is better than a video chat, I think most of the time. But if we can get a meal with someone, we would put that a notch higher.
We should have done this podcast over a meal.
We should have next time.
next time. All right, episode 2 for this. It'll be over a meal. I got to get the equipment for camera setups and all that. I love it. And so I want to come full circle in a way, based on our pre-chat, at least. I think not necessarily something we mentioned earlier in the conversation, although we've had Easter eggs here and there, which is the world of football, or in line with football. There's a line in Jason Kelce's retirement speech where he says, and I'm going to read this so I don't misquote, "My mother used to tell people, And still to this day, if you want Jason to do something, all you have to do is tell him he can't. And that was true in more ways than I care to admit. I relish doubters. They fuel the fire within. I suspect that comes with an upbringing where my parents would tell me, Jason, you can do, and you can be anything in this world you want to be as long as you put your mind to it and work hard to achieve it. And there's this also, to take a step back, he also quotes a Jeff Stoutland quote, which he says, hungry dogs run faster. And so my question to you, as we are about to turn on the seatbelt sign and fully land the flight here, what is something that others have told you you can't, but you have either willed into existence in the past or will into existence tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the one truism I try to live by, and we mentioned it earlier, I think to be the best LP over a long stretch of your career, especially now as so much capital is coming to the market, we always want to be mindful that what worked last year may not be the strategy this year. So trying to just say a pragmatist, I know that's a cop-out answer, but being an LP, it's very easy to keep doing the same things. Like it really is, right? You have this great portfolio and you want to be supportive. And I think what we try to really stress at Gresham is think differently. Like what's going to be the next great thing 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I think what I try to do and will myself every day is question my prior beliefs, right? Like, I wasn't the biggest believer in co-investments 10 years. And I thought there'd be negative selection bias. I was wrong. Like I think really good managers have provided some of their best deal flow to their current investors. So I think that's sort of a very distinct example to where I had an incorrect view and the goal is to right the ship. What I like to do every day is ask, like, what did I previously believe that may not be true today? So I try to do that. I wouldn't say it's willing it into existence, but we all know it's tough to change your view. And I think a willingness to be open-minded and question things that you may have believed in the past, to me, plays an important role in generating great results going forward.
You know what? Started off as a cop-out answer, but you gave a tactical example of co-investments, and I'm like, okay, you know what? You get a pass there. You get a pass. Well, actually, out of curiosity, maybe as last question, I promise this is the last question. What did Jason Kelce's retirement mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, that quote, I think what's like really cool in that quote is Jason Kelce was a very undersized center. In human context, he's a very big person, but in football context, he was not large. And he used his speed, he used his tenacity to become one of the best centers really in NFL history. And I think his retirement was sad because I think he represented everything that Philadelphia sports is. I mean, he just left it out in the field every single day. He even has a great speech quote yesterday, watching both his team have a very interesting and somewhat amazing Sunday night of the Super Bowl. And at the same time, trying to experience it through the lens of his brother, who was in very much the opposite end of that, and their parents who have to watch some of that. I think, if you saw a picture of me over the weekend, I was wearing a Kelce jersey because he, for me, was just a very special player. And he'll continue to be. I still listen to his podcast. Fortunately, I get to watch him on TV here and there. So I think he's just a good example of put your spirit into it. Hungry dogs will eat, so to speak.
I love it. I will have to ask you to donate a picture to the cause, though.
I will try to find one. There are fortunately a few of those running around of me in a Jason Kelce jersey enjoying New Orleans over the weekend for what was a very interesting game.
I love it. Well, Sean, this has been thoroughly enjoyable, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. Next time we do this, we're going to do this in person over a meal. But nevertheless, I've learned a lot from this. I'm sure a lot of our viewers will. And so as one last thing, where's the best place for people to find you?
Look, LinkedIn is still an easy way to catch us. My email's pretty out there at this point. I'd say find someone in venture capital and they probably have a connection to me. So do the typical connections or LinkedIn. Two easiest places.
There's a lot. We have a lot of mutuals. FYI.
We do. That's why I think most people, they can find me in one way or another.
Okay. I dig it. Well, Sean, thank you so much. This has been, as I mentioned earlier, thoroughly enjoyable. And I'm going to go back and revisit this episode a lot.
I enjoyed it too, David. Thank you.
Well, until the next time, Superclusters fans, see you soon.
It's a really thoughtful question.
I'll be honest, one thing we'll mention is that you're an Eagles fan. And so maybe you're in an Eagles jersey, which I have found photos of you in that. So again, like,
I mean, I may or may not have been in New Orleans the last few days. So.
may or may not.
Yeah, so I can get you a very recent Eagles fan pick. I was literally just there.
Amazing.
So,
What do you think? What do you think?
I mean, obviously the game was what it was. Like, as an Eagles fan, it was the best thing ever. As anyone else, it probably wasn't great. It was an amazing city for a Super Bowl. I mean, having done LA and having done Minneapolis, I think Minneapolis could have been good, but like everyone's in the same place in New Orleans. Like, everyone there was a football fan, right? Like, every bar, every restaurant, it made it like a huge just football weekend experience. Whereas like LA, I was just in LA and there happened to be a football game Sunday. Whereas like New Orleans, like it was the Super Bowl. It was pretty cool.
So it was like the culture of the entire city as opposed to an add-on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I mean, if you were there and you weren't a local, like the cost to get there, like it's a lot of work. Like, I think everyone was wholeheartedly football connected. Like, any bar you went into, it was like "Go Birds," like an Eagles thing. I think that to me made it a really special weekend. Like, obviously the outcome of the game was like definitely in my favor. Yeah. Not a bad thing. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Okay. Did you, and this is going totally off, not that we're recording really, but like, did you ever want there to be a little bit more action, a little bit more conflict? Because
in the game,
things flowed your way. Yeah, in the game itself, even though you guys won.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of funny because, I'm like, I really enjoy football. And if it's a close game, like I'm on the edge of my seat and I'm watching intently. Honestly, I was like running around just having a good time. Like, the game was over by halftime. And it was more like hugging and taking pictures and high-fiving people. I think if you had told me there was 3.5 quarters of excitement and then a half a quarter of high-fiving and like hugging, I would have called it a better outcome. It sort of was what it was. I mean, again, as an Eagles fan, really great night. Everyone else, I think that was just a disappointment. I understand that. But
hey, take what you will,
It was, it was great for me.
I love it. Hey, Superclusters fans, David from Post here. If you enjoyed today's episode, all I ask are 2 small things. 1, there's a little red subscribe button down there if you're on YouTube, and a follow button if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If and only if you enjoyed today's episode, that's the button to click. You'll get many more presents, many more insights, and many more brilliant minds straight through the internet vines just like this one very, very soon. 2, it'd mean a lot to me if you could share it with one other friend who could gain a lot from listening to today's Cosmos of Insights. Also, let me know if there's anything I should have asked down in the comments, and if there's enough interest, we'll have today's guest back for an even spicier part dose. I made a promise to myself to record 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, and review helps me make this experience more helpful and fun for you, and makes investing in venture a little less scary and a lot more friendly. And lastly, I wanted to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of any organization that we're a part of. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are purely for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. I'll see you on the next.